Hello my friends, in this video I will make you master the fundamentals of working with containers using the 10 most used and most common commands in Docker. If you are new to Docker, this video is for you. So let's get started. First of all, what is Docker? If you are not familiar with the concept of Docker, I really recommend that you watch my other video tutorial where I explain in detail without doing any coding what is Docker and why is it useful and what a Docker image is and container is. So now I want to make some recap on two concepts. The first concept is the concept of isolation or container isolation. When we work with containers, remember that containers are running application. So when we work with containers in Docker in our operating system, actually our containers are totally isolated from each others. So whatever resources found inside one container are not automatically and directly shared with other containers. So let's suppose that we have a file inside the segment of hard drive that is responsible for this Redis container. That file will not be directly accessible to the hard drive segment inside the PostgreSQL container, for example, or any other container on our system. Why? Because the containers are totally isolated. All the hardware resources here are totally isolated from the hardware resources here. So that's something you need to keep in mind while we learn these commands. And I will show you later how they are isolated and prove that to you. And the second concept I want to make sure that you are very clear about them is the concept of image and container. So what is an image? What is a container? First of all, we need to learn that Docker container is simply a running application. And that application is created or built from something called an image or a Docker image. So what is an image? A Docker image is simply a combination of two things. The first thing is file system snapshot. The first thing is the dependencies, the files, and the folders that our application needs in order to run. So imagine it as a file system snapshot. Okay, I don't have the entire file system. I just need the file system snapshot that is required for this specific application to run. The second thing that is included in this image is something called a default command. So any application, it has a default command to run. So let's suppose that we have a React application. In React application, default command is npm run start, right? So that's the default command, and it is called the default command because it is the first command that will be run when the container is created. So when we create this container, when we create this application, the first thing that will run is this default command. Okay, and I just want to make sure that it doesn't have to be npm run start, can be anything. And Docker is not exclusive to JavaScript ecosystem. We can run a Python application inside Docker. We can run a Java application. We can run anything you can imagine. So it's not exclusive to NPM or JavaScript. Okay, so that being said, now I think we are ready to go to PowerShell or any terminal in order to start working with Docker commands in order to understand and master working with containers. The first command that we need to learn is how we can create a container from an image. So the command is simply docker create, because I want to create a container from an image. And what is the image? I want to specify the name, which is hello world. And click enter. And as you can see, it says unable to find image locally. Locally means on the image cache, because there is something called an image cache where all our images are stored locally so that we can cache from that. So it doesn't find it there, so it has to go to something called Docker Hub. And Docker Hub is simply a repository, a public repository where people can create images and push that images to that Docker Hub. And here you can just pull these images to your system and create a container from them. So I created a container from this image, and that container has this ID. So I want to copy this ID and run the second command that I wanted to learn, which is docker start. Docker start actually starts the application that is inside that image. So, inside that container. So I want to click enter. And as you can see, the response I get was the container ID. Obviously, that's not the expected result, right? Because I'm expecting some output. So in order to see the output, I pass a flag, which is -a, and click enter again. And now I can see the output, which is hello from Docker. And this image shows that your installation appears to be working correctly. So I created this container and then I started that container. Now I want to show you another command, which is docker run. Okay, docker run does two things. We learned that we create a container using docker create, and we start a container using docker start. Docker run actually does these two things at the same time. Let me show you. If I run docker run, hello world, it will create a container and also it will start the container at the same time. Now, just keep in mind that I created a different container that from that same image. And here I want to make something very clear, which is if I go to the diagram, when I run in docker run hello world, actually it creates the container from this image, which is called hello world, and then it starts that container. And by starting the container, it starts the default command. And the default command, I don't know what the default command of this hello world image is, but I know that the output of it is this output, okay? So just keep in mind that when we run docker run, we actually run the default command of the container. But what if we decided that we need to override that command? So let's assume that we here docker run hello world, and then I want to override the default command which actually logs this output. I want to do something else like echo hello world. I click enter. It gives an error. It gives an error for a simple reason. If you remember, inside the Docker container and Docker image, I told you that in Docker image contains all the programs, all the files, all the directories, all the folders that our application needs in order to run successfully. And it turns out that the hello world image does not contain this echo command, because all commands are programs, right? Or files. So it doesn't contain these files inside its file system, and that's why I was not able to run this command inside the container, because Docker just doesn't understand how to run this command because it doesn't exist inside it. Okay, now let's go back here. I want to run a different command, docker run. Instead of hello world, let's try something else, which is Redis. First of all, let's see the default output of this Redis image. The default output is starting a Redis server on port 6379. Now I want to override that command, docker run. Instead of just let the Redis server start, I want to echo hello YouTube and click enter. I can see that it outputs this string hello YouTube. Why? Because it turns out that inside the file system of that image, which is called Redis, there is an application, or there is a program or file called echo. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Now I want to clear the console. I want to show you another command which is also very, very important, which is docker ps. Docker ps shows all the running containers inside our system. In my case, I don't have anything running at the moment. I created containers, but all these containers exited. And to prove my point, I can run docker ps-a. Docker ps-a shows all the containers and their status. So you can see I have different containers created from these images, hello world and Redis. And here the status is exited, which means the container started, but then it exited for some reason. Let me show you another thing, which is if I run docker run Redis, it starts a server, right? It starts a Redis server and it's listening, and the container did not exit, because in order to exit I have to press Ctrl+C in order to exit manually, but by default it doesn't exit. So let me show you another thing. If I go to another terminal and run docker ps, as I told you, shows only the running containers. And if you compare this ID to, let me run again docker ps -a. So this is the Redis container that I have just created about 36 seconds ago. So it's the newest one. If you compare this ID with this ID, you will see that they are the same. So anyway, if I run docker ps again, I have this container running, and I can see the default command, which is Redis server, and then the status of it and ports. Ports, the purpose of ports is to allow the internet, anyone on the internet, to connect to this Redis server that we have just created inside this container. So it allows anyone to connect to that Redis server using this port. But the first problem that we have is that this Redis server is locked inside the container. It's not exposed to the outside world. So we cannot by magic go to port 6379 and connect to that Redis server. It doesn't work like this. And the second thing that you need to understand is the difference between ports and IP addresses. IP addresses allows anyone on the internet to reach to your computer, but the port is to allow anyone on the internet not only to reach your computer, but to reach your application. So in order to reach a specific application on a specific computer, I need the IP address of that computer, and also I need the open port on that application. So by default, the open port of Redis server is 6379. And then the name is just a random piece of string that is associated with the container. So this is the output of docker ps. Here I want to mention something very, very important to understand, which is, if you remember, I told you docker run Redis. Redis starts a server, right? Redis server. But I want to override that command with echo something else like hello. Okay. When I click enter, what happens is I have this Docker image. Okay, let me change this to Redis. Okay, I have this Redis image, and inside it, the default command is, let's say it's Redis server. And when I run docker run Redis, and then I define a different command, this command, when it is copied inside the container, okay, when it's copied here, it's overridden by by echo hello, right? And the point I want to make sure that you understand very clearly, which is this overriding of the command or of the default command happens only once we create the container. And now, after we create the container, there is no way I can reach inside this container and tell it that, yeah, I want to change it. And to prove my point, let me show you. If I want to docker ps, okay, sorry, docker ps-a. Here I see all the commands, right? So assuming this Redis container, actually, let's see the general output of it, or the default output, docker start -a, and click enter. Yeah, it starts a server. Okay, so what happens if I decided, instead of just let it run the default command, I decided to echo something else like hello? Okay, it says you cannot start and attach multiple containers at once. The reason behind this error message is because we cannot go inside the container and tell it, yeah, I want to change the default command that you have inside. No, The only time that we are allowed to change the default command is when we create the container from the image. That's the only time. Okay, that's something very important to understand, because during debugging, you need to understand these underlying concepts. Okay, now let's see another command in Docker, which is docker stop. And of course, the name says that it stops the container. Now, yeah, I don't know the ID of this container, so I want to run docker ps again in order to see the running containers on my system, which is only one, which happens this Redis server. So I want to copy this ID and then docker stop and pass the ID and click enter. You see here it stopped and it says Redis is now ready to exit. Bye bye, and it exits. Okay, there is another command which is called docker run. I forgot -a. Oh, okay, sometimes it's buggy. Anyway, I started this container with this ID. Okay, and now I want to, instead of docker stop, I want to write docker kill. Docker kill is very similar to docker stop, and it also exits the container. But the difference between kill and stop is that stop gives the container some time in order to do some cleanup before it stops and shuts down. But kill gives a direct command to that container to immediately shuts down. Okay, it doesn't have to do any kind of cleanup. It just immediately shuts down. Okay, so this is the difference between kill and stop. The next command that I want you to understand is how to, after working with containers, after doing all this stuff, I want to do something called docker prune. Docker system prune. The Docker system prune actually removes all the containers and dangling images on our system. If I click enter, you see the warning. Warning, this would remove all stopped containers, so any container that is not running. Okay, and then it says all networks not used by at least one container. It's okay, we didn't discuss networks. And then all dangling images and unused build cache. Unused build cache means the image cache that we have. So I want to say yes and click enter. And after clicking enter, it will remove everything and you will see a reclaimed space. Now in my case, this laptop is very new. I bought it yesterday, so it doesn't have anything inside it. And that's why the total reclaimed space is only 0 bytes. But if you look at this screenshot, you see that I have reclaimed 22 gigabytes of space. And that's that's something very important to understand, is that when you work with Docker, it's very, very easy to run out of storage and run out of RAM, because Docker consumes a lot of RAM and a lot of space, especially when you work with different containers. Anyway, that's a different discussion. I want to clear the console. And the next command that we want to learn about is docker logs. Okay, so now I have two different containers and they both exited. Okay, none of them is running. What I can do is I can run docker logs and I can pass the ID of the container, for example, this hello world one, and click enter. What happens is I just see the logs or the output of that container. I do not run the container. I just see the output, okay, the log. Let's try on this Redis one as well. You can see this is the output, this is the logs, but it doesn't start any server, okay, it just logs it. This command is very useful when you want to do any kind of debugging for your Docker containers, sorry. And that's because sometimes some containers take a lot of time to start or to launch or to bootstrap. And that's when you want to see only the logs. You just want to see the logs without starting the container. So that's why docker logs is useful. Now, next to the last command, which is the hardest one of all the commands that we have discussed already, but it's also the most important to learn and to understand very well. Okay, so the command allows you to, if you remember, I told you that when we start the container, we actually run this default command. But we can also do something else, which is running two different commands at the same time. So the container must start with the default command, and then after that I can start another command in parallel with the default one. So how to do that? How to do that inside Docker? If I go here and docker run, no, not docker run, docker ps-a, I just want to see this ID. Okay, and then I want to start the container with this ID and click enter. Okay, I forgot to pass -a as a flag. Sometimes this command is buggy with Redis. I don't know why, but yeah, sometimes it doesn't show the output, but all you need to do is just exit and start again, and it happens. So you see here the output, it says ready to accept TCP connections on port 6379. Now the container is running, right? What I can do is I can go inside that container. Okay, while this container is running, I want to go inside it. So let me here. Okay, this is the default command. What I can do is now, while it is running, I can go inside the container and start another command. Okay, I want to start another command, which is docker execute. Okay, -i-t. If you don't understand -i-t, that's totally okay. I will explain that later. So docker execute -i-t, and then I give it the ID. So this is the ID, and then the command that I want to execute in parallel with the default command. The command I want to run in parallel is echo hello people, and click enter. You see, while this container is running, I managed to run a different command. Now, why this is useful? Let me show you. Let me show you a specific example in Redis. If I run docker execute -it, we don't need to write -i-t. We can write simply -it, and then pass the ID of the container, and then I will pass the command. The command is redis CLI. Okay, now how do I know that redis CLI? Because I know for sure that inside this image, inside the file system snapshot of this image, which is called redis, okay, I have a command, okay, a file or a command called redis CLI. If we have some hello world program or something else, Node or Java, of course Redis CLI will not be installed there. But with this specific image called Redis, I know for sure that there is a program called Redis CLI. That's why I was able to run Redis CLI inside it. So let me click enter and see what happens. Redis CLI is Redis client. So basically I'm connecting to that server. Okay, but I told you previously that I cannot by magic go to this local host, which is my computer, and connect to port 6379. Why? Because this container is isolated. Okay, so there is no way I can go to the local host and go to port 6379 and connect to the server. But here you can see that I managed to connect to it. I was able to connect to that server, and it's running perfectly fine. But now I want you to understand, I want you to think why I was able to connect to localhost on port 6379, although I told you that the container is an isolated system and I cannot connect to it from the outside world. Why do you think I was able to connect to this localhost? Pause the video, think about it, and let me know. The reason is because localhost is the local host of the container. It's not the local host of the machine or the host machine that I'm running. It's only local host of the container. Okay, that's something very important to know, because here in this command, I was able to connect to the inside of the container. I will show you in a little bit how I was able to connect to the inside of the container. But now I want to run some commands, some Redis commands, I mean. Set my name Mark. So if you are not familiar with Redis commands, that's totally fine. It's not something complicated. Redis is very simple, very easy to learn. So basically I'm creating key value pairs inside this database, and click enter, and it says, okay, so I managed to successfully create this key value pairs, my name and key. And I can get back, so my name, okay, I can get back this key or the value that associated with that key, which is Mark. And that proves that the client works perfectly fine. Now, the question is, what is this -i-t or -it? Let me go to my diagrams. As you can realize that I love diagrams so much because they help in understanding the concepts very easily. So remember, when you install Docker on your system, you are basically running a Linux virtual machine. It's a very basic Linux virtual machine, but still it's an operating system in of itself. So we have the virtual machine, Linux virtual machine, and any container that we runs actually inside this this Linux virtual machine that comes with Docker. Okay, and all the containers run inside, and inside these containers we have the applications. So basically our applications run inside Linux virtual machine. And in Linux, all the applications, okay, which are in this case the containers, okay, all the applications have three channels of communication. We have standard in, we have standard out, and we have standard error. Standard in channel allows us to connect to the inside of the container, and standard out allows us to connect to the to see the output of this application. Okay, and the last one is standard error. Standard error is just a way of communication of any errors that come from the application. Okay, so in this case, when I run docker execute -i-t, it means that -i I want to connect to the standard in channel, and -t means I want to connect to the standard out channel. So that's why I was able to pass this command to this container, because I connected to the standard in channel, and I was able to see this output. Okay, all this output that you see here, I was able to see it because of this command -t. Okay, because it connects to the standard out communication channel. And that's why when I connected to the inside of the container, I am actually inside the local host. Okay, that's something very, very important to know. Okay, now let me show you another thing. If I exit here and run the same command, which is docker execute, but instead of -i-t, I just want to connect to the standard in channel. I click enter. You see, I am connected. I am inside the container, but there is no way I can see any output because I did not connect to the output channel. I can run any command you want. My key, Mark. It says okay, but I don't see any output, right? It's not like in this case, it shows me the 6379 port, or if you remember, I got some form of autocomplete. All these outputs are not generated when I don't connect to the output channel. Okay, so I want to exit and show you another thing. If you remember, I told you that our containers are totally isolated from each other. So let me prove that point. If I run docker ps-a, basically we have two containers, just like in this case. Okay, but instead of PostgreSQL container, I have hello world container. Now what I can do is I can go execute -it to this container, and instead of running a Redis CLI, which is a specific case of Redis, I want to run a different command, which is sh. sh allows us to open a shell inside the container. Actually, this command, execute -id with the sh command, is the most useful one, because that is what is used in the real world. We want sometimes to connect to the inside of the container and open a shell inside it to run some commands to do some debugging. So here I want to open a shell inside that container and click enter. And if I run ls, I see all the files inside that container. So what I can do is I can create a folder, make directory, and that folder is called app. And if I run ls again, you see I have app inside that container. And now I want to discuss the last thing in this video, which is the concept of Docker container isolation. So I told you in the beginning that containers are totally isolated from each other, and whatever exists here is not accessible in the other container. Now I want to prove that through the terminal or through the PowerShell command, so command line. So let me run docker run Redis. So this will create a Redis server or Redis container and start a Redis server inside it. I want to run docker run Redis in another shell. Okay, so I have two Redis servers running, and I want here to docker ps -a, or no need to -a, docker ps is fine. So I see these two different containers. What I want to do is I want to docker execute -it and then give it the ID of the first one and open a shell inside it. And here if I check ls, you see there is nothing inside. And what I can do is let's make a directory called app. Okay, and if I run ls again, I will see app. Okay, this is a folder or directory I created inside the first container. Now I want to exit and go to docker execute -it. Then I will pass the ID of the second one and open a shell inside it and check ls. You see when I run ls, I don't see the app folder which exists in the first container. Okay, this proves that whatever I create here does not exist here. And let me exit and come back to the first one. Okay, the first one still contains that folder. Okay, this proves that whatever I create inside one container that is not existed in the second container. Although I have a single hard drive on my local host, that doesn't matter, because what happens in Docker is that the single hard drive is segmented into different containers or different parts that shows different containers, and each container has its own share of the hard drive or RAM or network or whatever hardware resources. So that's all I have to say about these commands. I hope you found this video helpful and useful for you, and if you did, I would really appreciate it if you click the like button below and subscribe to my channel to support me and to support my channel, and also for the YouTube algorithm. Until now, take care of yourselves, and see you very soon.